3 years ago, I was sleeping in my car in a Walmart parking lot. I hadn't showered in 4 days. I had $11 in my wallet. And I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling of my old Honda, thinking, this is it. This is my life now. Then, about 6 weeks later, a lawyer called me. A total stranger. He said a man I barely knew, a man I'd only met a handful of times, had left me his entire fortune. $11,200,000. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, right there in the parking lot, because I thought it was a scam. I thought someone was messing with me. It wasn't a scam. And by the end of this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how a homeless man, me, ended up inheriting a fortune from someone I thought was just a lonely old man who liked to talk too much at a gas station. But before I get to that part, you need to understand how I got so low in the first place. Because trust me, this story isn't really about money. It's about something a lot bigger than that. So stick with me. Let's start from the beginning. My name is Daniel. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my life, I was what you'd call a normal, hardworking guy. Nothing special. Nothing extraordinary. I grew up in a small town outside Dayton, Ohio. My dad worked at a factory his whole life, and my mom cleaned houses on the side to help make ends meet. We weren't poor exactly, but we weren't comfortable either. We were the kind of family that checked the price tag twice before buying anything. I tell you this because I want you to understand, I didn't grow up expecting handouts. I grew up believing that if you work hard enough, things eventually work out. That's what my dad always told me. Put your head down, Daniel. Do the work. The rest takes care of itself. For a long time, I actually believed that. I got married at 26. Her name was Rachel. We met at a community college. She was studying nursing. I was doing a certificate in HVAC repair, heating and air conditioning systems. We had nothing in common on paper, but somehow, we just clicked. You know how that is, right? Sometimes it's not about what makes sense. It's just about who makes you feel like yourself. We got married in a backyard. Nothing fancy. Her aunt made the cake. I wore my only suit. For a few years, things were actually good. I got a steady job with a local HVAC company. Rachel got hired at a hospital. We saved up, bought a small 3-bedroom house, nothing special, but it was ours. We had our first kid, a boy, Ethan. Then 2 years later, our daughter, Mia. I remember standing in that kitchen one night, doing dishes, watching my kids color at the table, and thinking, this is it. This is the whole point of everything. This is what my dad meant when he said things work out. I want you to remember that moment. Because everything after this is where things fell apart. You ever notice how life doesn't usually fall apart all at once? It's not one big disaster. It's little cracks. Little things that build up until one day, you look around and the whole thing has collapsed, and you can't even point to the exact moment it happened. For me, it started with my back. I was doing a job, crawling through a tight attic space installing ductwork, and I slipped. Fell about 6 feet onto a support beam. At first, I thought I just bruised myself. I finished the job. I even drove home. 3 days later, I couldn't get out of bed. Turns out I'd herniated 2 discs in my lower back. The doctor told me flat out, no more crawling through attics, no more lifting heavy equipment, no more climbing ladders. For someone in HVAC, that's basically your whole job. That's everything. I want you to sit with that for a second. Imagine the one skill you've built your entire career around, gone. Overnight. Not because you did anything wrong. Just because of one bad step in one dark attic. My company tried to find me a desk job for a while, doing scheduling and paperwork. But 6 months later they had layoffs, and guess who got let go first? The guy who couldn't do the physical work anymore. I didn't panic right away. I told myself, okay, this is rough, but we'll figure it out. Rachel was still working. We had some savings. I thought I'd find something else within a couple months. You might be wondering how bad it actually got. Let me tell you, it got a lot worse before it got better. I applied to over 60 jobs in 4 months. Warehouse work, driving, retail management, anything. My back pain made half of those jobs impossible anyway, but I applied regardless because I was desperate. Then Rachel's hospital got bought out by a bigger healthcare company, and half the nursing staff got restructured. She kept her job, thank God, but her hours got cut in half. 2 incomes turned into 1 partial income. Savings started disappearing. First the emergency fund. Then the money we'd set aside for the kids' school stuff. Then we started falling behind on the mortgage. I remember the first time I had to tell Rachel we couldn't make the full house payment that month. I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to watch the kids color, and I just couldn't get the words out. I kept starting sentences and stopping. She finally just said, "Daniel, just say it." And I said, "We're short $400 this month." $400. I want you to understand something. $400 used to feel like nothing to me. A tank of gas, a nice dinner out, whatever. Now it felt like the difference between keeping our house and losing it. I'm not going to drag this part out longer than it needs to be, because honestly, even now, it's hard for me to talk about. We lost the house about 14 months after my injury. I remember the day the bank sent the final notice. I sat in my truck in the driveway, the truck I hadn't sold yet, and I just stared at the house. Our house. The house where Ethan learned to ride a bike in the driveway. Where Mia had her 5th birthday party in the backyard with a bouncy castle we could barely afford. And I thought, how did I let this happen? That question haunted me for a long, long time. How did I let this happen? Like it was some personal failure. Like if I'd just worked harder, tried more, done something different, none of this would have happened. I know now that's not fair to myself. But back then, that's all I could think. Rachel and I moved in with her parents for a while, with the kids. That in itself was hard, a grown man, in his 30s, sleeping in his in-law's basement with his wife and 2 kids. Every morning I'd wake up and just feel this weight sitting on my chest before I even opened my eyes. But here's the part that really broke things. The stress. The constant stress of money, of failure, of feeling like less of a man, less of a husband, it started poisoning everything else. Rachel and I started fighting. Not the normal kind of arguing every couple has. I mean real fighting. About money, about blame, about who was doing more, who wasn't doing enough. I said things I regret. She said things too. We were 2 people drowning, and instead of holding on to each other, we were pulling each other under. About 8 months after we moved in with her parents, Rachel told me she needed space. She wasn't leaving me exactly, not at first. She just needed to think. 2 months after that, she told me she wanted a divorce. I'm not going to sit here and blame her. Looking back, I understand it. I wasn't the man she married anymore. I was angry all the time. I was ashamed all the time. I pushed her away before she ever had the chance to push me. The divorce was finalized about 5 months later. She got primary custody of the kids, which, honestly, made sense. I didn't have a stable place to live. I didn't have steady income. What was I going to offer them? I want to pause here for a second, because I know some of you watching this might be going through something similar right now. Maybe not exactly this. But that feeling of losing everything you built, piece by piece, and feeling powerless to stop it, if you know that feeling, I see you. I really do. After the divorce, I couldn't stay at her parents' house anymore. That would have been strange for everyone. I had nowhere else to go. That's when I started living in my car. People have this idea in their head of what homelessness looks like. They picture someone on a street corner with a cardboard sign. They don't picture a guy who used to have a mortgage and 2 kids and a wedding ring, parked in a Walmart parking lot at 11 at night, trying to figure out how to angle the seats so his back doesn't scream at him all night. That was me for almost 5 months. I want to be honest with you about what that actually feels like, because I don't think people talk about it enough. It's not just the physical discomfort, though trust me, sleeping in a car with a bad back is its own kind of torture. It's the shame. The constant, quiet shame that sits with you every single hour of every single day. You start avoiding people you know. You take weird routes to avoid driving past your old house. You shower at truck stops or gyms when you can scrape together a day pass. You learn which parking lots security guards will leave you alone in, and which ones will knock on your window at 2 in the morning. I remember the first time Ethan called me, he was 9 at the time, and asked, "Dad, where do you live now?" And I told him, "Daddy's staying somewhere temporary right now, buddy. Just for a little while." I couldn't tell my own son I was living in a car. I couldn't do it. You might be wondering how someone goes from having a whole life, a house, a marriage, 2 kids, a career, to sleeping in a Honda Civic in under 2 years. And honestly, I ask myself that same question all the time. The answer is, it doesn't take some huge dramatic event. It takes a series of small losses, one after another, until there's nothing left to lose. I picked up whatever work I could find. Day labor. A little bit of handyman work for cash, when my back allowed it. I wasn't proud. I did what I had to do. And that's actually how I met him. There was this gas station I used to stop at almost every day. Not because I needed gas most days. I barely had money for that. But because they had a bathroom I could use, and sometimes the guy behind the counter would let me fill up my water bottle for free. There was an old man who was always there. Always. Same time, almost every single day. Sitting outside on a bench near the ice machine, drinking black coffee from a paper cup, watching cars go by. At first, I didn't think much of him. Just some old guy who liked hanging around gas stations, like a lot of retired folks do. He wore the same worn-out flannel jacket almost every time I saw him, even when it wasn't cold. Simple guy, I figured. Maybe a retired mechanic, or a truck driver, something like that. One day, he asked me for a light. I didn't smoke, but I had a lighter in my glove box from before, used to spark up the grill. I gave it to him. He lit his cigarette, handed it back, and said, "You look like a man carrying something heavy." I remember laughing a little, more out of discomfort than humor, and saying, "Yeah, something like that." He just nodded. Didn't push. Didn't ask questions. Just said, "Well, if you ever want to set it down for a minute, I'm usually right here." I didn't think much of it at the time. But over the next few weeks, I kept running into him. And slowly, without really planning to, I started talking to him. Not everything, not at first. Just little pieces. That I used to have a family. That things had gone bad. That I was staying wherever I could. He never judged. He never gave me that look people give you when they find out you're struggling. That mix of pity and distance, like they're worried it might be contagious. He just listened. Really listened, like what I was saying actually mattered. His name was Walter. I want you to remember that name, because it's going to come up again in a big way. Walter never talked much about himself. I knew he lived alone. I knew his wife had passed years before. I knew he used to work in business, as he put it, though he never got specific, and honestly I never asked. When you're in survival mode, you're not exactly focused on other people's backstories. I just figured he was a retired guy on a fixed income, filling his days at a gas station because maybe he was lonely. Some days he'd buy me a coffee. Once he bought me a sandwich from the little store inside without me even asking, just set it down next to me and said, "Eat. You look thin." I want to be honest, there were days I felt embarrassed around him. Here's this old man, probably living off Social Security, buying food for a grown man like me. I told him once, "Walter, you don't have to do this." And he looked at me and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Son, the world doesn't need more people who watch other people suffer and do nothing. It needs more people who do something, even when it's small." I didn't know it then, but that sentence would end up meaning a lot more to me than I could have imagined. Over the next few months, my visits with Walter became the one steady thing in my life. Everything else was falling apart or barely holding together, but every few days there he was, same bench, same coffee, same quiet presence. I started opening up more. I told him about Rachel. About the kids. About how ashamed I felt every time Ethan asked when he could come visit me somewhere that wasn't a fast food restaurant parking lot. Walter listened to all of it without flinching. And every once in a while, he'd say something simple but heavy. Things like, "Struggling isn't the same as failing, Daniel. Don't confuse the two." Or, "A man's worth was never in his bank account. Don't let this season convince you otherwise." At the time, I nodded along, but honestly, some of that stuff felt like nice words that didn't change my actual situation. I was still sleeping in a car. Nice words don't pay for gas. But I kept coming back anyway. Because for those 20-30 minutes a few times a week, I felt like a person again. Not a failure. Not a burden. Just a person, talking to another person. One afternoon, I remember this clearly because it was raining hard, Walter didn't look like himself. He looked pale. Tired in a different way than usual. I asked if he was okay, and he brushed it off, said he was just getting old. I didn't push. I figured it wasn't my place. About 2 weeks after that, I stopped by the gas station, and he wasn't on the bench. I figured maybe he was running late, or maybe the weather kept him inside. I waited around for almost an hour. He never showed. The next day, same thing. And the day after that. I finally asked the clerk inside, a young guy named Marcus, if he knew what happened to the old man who always sat outside. Marcus got quiet for a second, and then he told me Walter had passed away. A heart attack in his sleep, about 4 days earlier. I sat in my car in that parking lot for almost an hour after hearing that. I wasn't just sad, I was gutted. This man, this stranger who somehow became the one steady, kind presence in the worst chapter of my life, was just gone. And I never even got to say goodbye. I remember thinking, Of course the one person who was kind to me during all this is gone now too. That's the kind of bitter thought your brain throws at you when you've been knocked down enough times. I figured that was the end of it. A sad chapter closing. I mourned him quietly, the way you mourn someone the world doesn't know you had a relationship with. No funeral invitation. No formal place in his life, as far as I knew. Just a guy who used to buy me coffee. I never imagined it wasn't over. About 6 weeks after Walter passed, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally I'd ignore calls like that, probably a scam, or a collections agency chasing an old bill. But something made me pick up that day. The man on the other end introduced himself as an attorney, representing the estate of a Walter Hensley. I actually had to ask him to repeat the last name, because I realized in all those months of talking to Walter, I never once knew his last name. The attorney told me Walter had passed away and that I was named in his will. I remember laughing, not a happy laugh, more of a confused. This has to be some kind of mix-up. Laugh. I told him. There's no way. I barely knew the guy. We just talked at a gas station sometimes. He said, Mr. Cole, I understand your confusion. But Mr. Hensley was very specific in his instructions. He wanted you to have this. I asked how much we were talking about, honestly expecting maybe a few $100s, something sentimental. Enough for a nice meal, maybe. He told me the total value of the estate coming to me was just over $11 million. I want to be honest with you, in that moment, sitting in my car in that same Walmart parking lot where I'd been sleeping for months, I didn't feel joy. I felt confusion. Disbelief. My hands were actually shaking as I held the phone. I asked him, Are you sure you have the right person? He said Walter had left very clear written instructions, along with a letter addressed specifically to me. Here's the part of the story that still gets me, every single time I tell it. Walter Hensley wasn't just some retired guy living paycheck to paycheck. Decades earlier, he'd co-founded a small manufacturing supply company. Nothing flashy. No headlines, no interviews, nothing you'd have heard of. But over almost 50 years, that small company grew, got bought out, reinvested, grew again. Walter had quietly become a wealthy man. Genuinely wealthy. But he lived like he had nothing. Same modest house he'd bought decades earlier. Same old truck. Same flannel jacket. He gave away large portions of his money to causes he cared about, quietly, without ever wanting credit. His wife had passed away 12 years before I met him. They never had children. As far as the lawyer could tell me, Walter had very few close relationships left in the world by the time I met him. He was, in his own way, just as alone as I felt. In his letter to me, and I still have this letter, I've read it more times than I can count, Walter wrote that our conversations at that gas station meant more to him than I could have known. He wrote that in me, he saw someone who hadn't given up, even when every part of his life had been stripped away. He wrote that he'd watched a lot of people in his life chase money and lose themselves in the process, and that he wanted his fortune to go to someone who understood, firsthand, what actually mattered. He wrote one line I'll never forget. He said, "Daniel, you gave an old, lonely man your time when you had nothing else to give. That was worth more than anything money could buy. Let me give you back a chance." I sat in my car and cried harder than I had in years. Not just from shock. From grief. From guilt, honestly, guilt that I never really knew this man, not fully, and now I never would. Guilt that all those months, I thought I was the one being helped, when really, we were helping each other. I want to be clear about something. This story isn't really about becoming a millionaire overnight. I know that's the flashy part, the part that probably got you clicking on this video in the first place. But if that's all you take from this, you're missing the actual point. The money mattered, sure. It let me get back on my feet in ways I couldn't have imagined a year before. I got an apartment. A real one, with a real bed. I paid off every debt I had. I hired a good lawyer to help me negotiate more time with my kids, and slowly, started rebuilding that relationship. Ethan and Mia visit me regularly now. We're not perfect, none of us are, but we're healing. I got surgery on my back that I could never have afforded before, and for the first time in years, I woke up without that dull, constant ache. But here's what I actually did with most of that money, and this is the part I'm most proud of. I started a small foundation in Walter's name. Not some huge, flashy charity with a fancy building and a PR team. Just something simple. We help people who are going through exactly what I went through, people who lost their jobs due to injury, people going through divorce, people one step away from living in their car, or already there. We help with rent. With job training. With lawyer fees for custody battles. With simple things, honestly, sometimes just enough money to get someone through one more month so they don't lose everything the way I almost did. I still go to that same gas station sometimes. I still sit on that same bench. Sometimes I bring coffee for whoever's sitting there, a stranger, someone having a hard day. I don't tell them who I am or what happened to me. I just sit, and if they want to talk, I listen. The way Walter listened to me. You might be wondering what the actual lesson is here. Believe me, I've had a lot of time to think about it. Here's what I've come to understand. Walter didn't leave me his fortune because I did anything special. I didn't save his life. I didn't do him some huge favor. All I did was show up, again and again, and treat him like a person instead of just some old guy at a gas station. That's it. That's the whole thing. We live in a world that's constantly telling us to network, to look for what we can get out of every relationship, to calculate the value of every interaction. Walter taught me the opposite. He taught me that the smallest acts of decency, just listening, just showing up, just treating someone like they matter, can ripple out in ways you'll never see coming. I also learned something about my own lowest point. When I was sleeping in that car, I genuinely believed my life was over. I believed I was a failure, that I'd never recover, that everything good in my life was permanently behind me. I was wrong. Not because a miracle came and saved me, though I know how lucky I am, and I don't take that for granted for one single day. I was wrong because rock bottom isn't actually the end of your story. It just feels that way when you're in it. If you're watching this right now, and you're going through your own version of sleeping in the car, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's actual homelessness, or a marriage falling apart, or feeling like you've lost everything you built, I need you to hear this. Your situation right now is not the final chapter. I know it feels permanent. I know it feels like there's no way out. I promise you, I felt exactly the same way. I'm not saying everyone's story ends with an inheritance from a stranger. That's not the point, and honestly, that's not really what saved me in the end. What saved me was refusing to become bitter. What saved me was still being willing to talk to a stranger on a bench, even when I had every reason to shut the world out completely. Walter didn't just leave me money. He left me proof that kindness, even small kindness, even quiet kindness that nobody's watching, still matters. Still counts for something. So here's what I want to ask you, before you go. Is there someone in your life right now, a neighbor, a stranger at a coffee shop, an old man sitting alone on a bench somewhere, who could use 5 minutes of your time? Not your money. Not some grand gesture. Just your time, and your attention. I used to think the big moments were what defined a life. The wedding. The house. The big paycheck. Now I think it's actually the small moments. A gas station bench. A cup of coffee. A conversation with someone the rest of the world walks past without noticing. If this story meant something to you, I'd really love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, has a stranger ever changed your life, even in some small way? I read every single comment, and honestly, hearing your stories helps me just as much as sharing mine does. And if you want to hear more real stories like this one, raw, honest, no filters, hit subscribe, and stick around. Because I promise you, mine isn't the only story out there like this. There are people all around us, quietly carrying something heavy, waiting for someone to simply sit down next to them and listen. Thank you for watching. And whatever you're going through right now, I mean this with everything I have, please don't give up. You never know who's watching. You never know who you might be about to meet. Sometimes, it's the person sitting alone on a bench that ends up changing everything.